I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage, but the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice, till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight. Entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST. The future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show, where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout.
New board, who dis? No, not really, but new computer, so board can do things board wasn't able to do before. So I'm still learning the new sliders. Anyway, so welcome into the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Feels Like a Monday edition of this particular day that we call around here Chat Lives Matter Day. So yeah, it's been a crazy couple weeks. Just saying, it's been a crazy couple weeks. It really has. Lots of things are changing around here. As a matter of fact, we may let you know about a new couple of folks around here that are helping to support the show now starting next week. I planned on it this week, but it's taken me so long to get things lined out that I don't want them to start tuning in and going, oh my God, we're helping to pay for this. And it sounds like a train wreck. I did try to warn them about that in advance, though, so it's kind of not really my fault. I'm just saying. All right, but as a reminder, it is this day, so here we go.
Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, live right here on KLRradio.com. Again, I am Rick Robinson, General Manager, KLRradio.com, DigitalBeaconUSNews.com, contributor, Twitchy.com, MisfitsPolitics.com, LoftusParty.com, cause, hi, my name's Rick, I'm a workaholic. My last meeting was for never ago. All right, so let's get things started officially, shall we? Shall we get things started officially? And it's going to be a little different because, well, first, since we do have people starting to pay for some of the content, this show is going to start being about 70-30 national versus local. Because, well, the other reason I've made that decision is honestly, there's almost no network in Oklahoma anymore that does live local radio. There's one left. And it's the Eagle out of Enid. Everybody else has gone to national syndication stuff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which I get. It's a solid business decision for them. They don't have to worry about paying people out of their own pockets, etc. These people are buying the airtime instead of them having to pay for it. So I understand, but at the same time, I feel like Oklahoma's kind of being left in the lurch, and it's nothing against the guys at the Eagle. Actually, Jason Doyle was doing their morning show, which they give an hour to local news in the mornings, and then they do the usual drive time format, I think starting at 4. So if you're in Oklahoma and you haven't checked them out yet, check out 96.9. I know technically I'm supposed to be competing with them, but again, Jason Doyle was doing the morning show, their morning show, and now damn it, Brillbeck is Aaron Brillbeck. I knew his name was in there somewhere, which he used to come hang out with me all the time when I was filling in on KOKC. So yeah, I know I'm weird. I promote people I'm supposed to be competing against because I don't know. Like I said, I'm just weird like that. But anyway, welcome to the program. So yeah, and just a disclaimer for those of you who don't live in Oklahoma, we are going to start there. There's still going to be a lot of national level stuff too, but for the first time in a while, we're actually going to start out here locally because there's some local stories that have national consequences. So again, my name is Rick Robinson. This is my show, and today I do want to start close to home because Oklahoma voters went to the polls yesterday, and depending on which race or question you look at, they said some very different things, and that matters because one of the easiest mistakes we make in politics is taking one election result, one endorsement, one candidate win, and declaring that we have suddenly discovered what the voters believe, which is not true, especially in this particular instance. So Oklahoma just gave us a pretty good reminder that voters are a little more complicated than that, and the folks that try to supposedly represent the voters tend to forget that. And the Republican runoff for Governor Mike Mazzei defeated Attorney General Gentner Drummond by about 2,000 votes statewide. So you might as well say by a whisker. So again, not 20,000 votes, not 200,000 votes, but about 2,000. That is out of hundreds of thousands of Republican votes cast. So before anybody starts writing the inevitable headlines about some sweeping mandate, maybe put the broom back in the closet for a minute, because this was not a sweep. This was a coin toss that eventually landed on Mike Mazzei. Oklahoma's Voice reported that Mazzei narrowly secured the nomination after being backed by President Donald Trump and Governor Kevin Stitt in the June primary. Drummond received 26.25% of the vote and Mazzei 25.97%. Think about that for a second. They went into a runoff separated by less than 1 percentage point. They spent another couple of months beating the tar out of one another politically, and when Republicans came back to vote again, they were still almost perfectly divided. That's the story. Not that Oklahoma suddenly became less Republican, because it didn't. Not that Donald Trump's endorsement didn't matter, because it probably did. That's probably what reversed the roles slightly between the primary and the primary runoff. But when you only win by about 2,000 votes, anything that moves a few thousand people matters. The Trump endorsement matters. The Stitt endorsement matters. Campaign spending matters. Turnout matters. Election day organization matters. Every one of those things can become decisive in a race that's close. And it wasn't just Trump and Stitt. The Oklahoma Republican Party State Committee took the unusual step of endorsing Mike Mazzei before Republican voters had settled the runoff themselves. Some longtime Republicans here locally complained that the party organization was putting its thumb on the scale. And even with all three of those forces lined up behind Mazzei, Republicans still split almost straight down the middle. So there's a difference between saying those endorsements may have helped provide the winning margin and saying the results proves Oklahoma Republicans overwhelmingly agreed with the candidate who received them, because they plainly did not. So this is where I'm going to break from my notes for just a moment, because I've been talking to a couple of folks about this very thing right now here in Oklahoma. This is so for those of you who don't know, Oklahoma has had a Republican governor for the last 16 years. Now, before that, it was usually Democrats got a turn, Republicans got a turn, Democrats got a turn, Republicans got a turn. And it was usually kind of a handoff. The problem that we have here is that Oklahoma is in such a position that we may wind up with a Democratic governor, possibly, because a lot of people in Oklahoma still feel like most Democrats in Oklahoma would be Republicans anywhere else anyway. And I used to say that all the time. However, that's not necessarily true. Good luck trolling me by text, sir. My phone's in the other room. Haha. You'll get me next time, Gadget. Next time. Anyway, sorry. But no, seriously. This could be the time that we see another Democratic governor. It's been 16 years. A lot of folks feel like the needle hasn't moved far enough in the last 16 years. I feel the opposite. I know there are still things in this state that don't work the way people want them to, but a lot of that has nothing to do with the governor. It has to do with unions and everything else pushing for their particular agendas. That's like everybody screaming and yelling that depending on where you look, Oklahoma's 49th or 50th in the country for education. Okay, cool, fine. But let's talk about why that number doesn't matter the way they think it matters, because it looks at things like how much money you spend per pupil. It doesn't cost as much to live in Oklahoma, so it doesn't require that we spend as much per pupil as states that have 6 times the cost of living that we do. Now, I can tell you there are plenty of things wrong in Oklahoma schools, even though we are a red state. But that is predominantly, and this is something that I've talked about all the time, that is predominantly because we have this cookie cutter approach to education, which we know doesn't work. Cookie cutter approaches to anything don't work. Look at what's happened to our higher education system. They now turn out commies and Muslim sympathizers all day long, 7 days a week and twice on Sundays. I'm just saying, that's the world we live in right now. Even in red states, this is still happening in red states. We talk about how red Oklahoma is, but there are blue enclaves. And the more gentrification we do, and the more people that move in out of state because they can get a huge house here for a fraction of what they would pay for a shoebox in another state, who then come in and start voting for the very same things that they left the other state when they realized they couldn't really afford the tax anymore because of everything that they have to pay for there. Then that, well, we missed this and we missed this, we missed this. We should start voting for them to do things like this here. And then eventually the Democrats, the locusts that they are, move on to somewhere else and turn it more blue, and then wait till it's almost nearly destroyed, and then move on and lather, rinse, repeat over and over and over again, because that's pretty much what they do. This has been happening in Oklahoma, and I knew we were heading in that direction when I started seeing things like condos popping up in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma's never been a condo place, never. And when I started seeing all these places are in and around Bricktown that were putting in condos, I was like, yeah, just wait. And then sure enough, in I believe it was 2016, I think, CD5 went blue. Or no, it was 2018, because in 2020 it changed back. That's right. So yeah, 2018, CD5 went blue for the first time in like 50 some odd years. I think it was 55, 57. And then in 2 years, voters went, nah, we tried it, we didn't like it. And then they changed back. And then that's when the Republicans around here were like, oh, we've got it on lock from now on. We can just coast. Problem is the GOP does that a lot. Everybody talks about how great it is that the Republican Party has so much more in the coffers than everybody else does. Yeah. But the problem is that's because They don't invest like the Democrats do. Sorry, I just realized I had Amy's QR code up from Friday, so I should probably put ours back up. But yeah, they don't we don't invest. Well, I should say they, because I'm still technically a little libertarian. I keep telling myself I'm going to change back so I can vote in primaries, but then I feel like I'm beating the crap out of my own side if I'm a registered Republican while I'm talking crap about registered Republicans. Because then I feel like I'm breaking Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, which I know most of the Republican Party doesn't care about anymore, but I still kind of do. So I know it's a technicality, but it helps me sleep at night, the little bit that I get. Just saying. Just saying. But yeah, so look, I know there's lots of messes in Oklahoma. I know things aren't perfect. But with the other side starting to openly embrace groups like the DSA and openly standing for, Israelis being basically shoved back into ovens, because I know they're not saying that yet, but that's basically how they're acting. That's the funny thing. They've been the ones accusing us of being the Nazis for the last 10 years. Kept trying to tell you every allegation is actually a projection because they think that we think just like they do. So they think they can say all these things because since they're secretly thinking it, they assume we are too. Anyway. Denny, I'll have to look at that in a minute. There should, if nothing else. I'm sorry, I'm addressing a technical question in the chat. I try to avoid that, but with as much as X is messing with things lately, I should probably try to let folks know this. If for some reason you cannot hit the quote post button, there should be a copy link inside the 3 dots. You can just copy the link, open it, and put the link in there, and then do your usual whatever you want to say about it. Then it looks just like a quote post when you're done. Anyway, so enough about that. All right, so we are going to take a quick break. But while we do that, remember, I know I said I wasn't going to start this till next week, but I might as well start now. Let me tell you about one of my new friends around here, and that is Nectar Sleep. You can see a QR code right there that says $100 off. I do encourage you to at least scan the QR code and check out what they offer, because I've been sleeping on one of their beds now since Saturday night, and it's amazing. Dude, it really is. You guys know me. I don't promote things that I don't actually use, which is why I wanted to sleep on it for a few nights before I started talking about it. It is probably, honestly, I've only bought 3 big boy beds in my entire life, because I didn't even buy my first house until 11 years ago. So it wasn't anything that I was ever really worried about before, because we had a bed and it worked. And then when we moved, we decided we wanted a new bed. And then I got another one after the divorce. And that one was a cheaper one and it didn't last very long. So I decided this time I was going to go ahead and invest in something. And this one's pretty darn awesome. It's adjustable. It's got the massage. It's got all the things. So now if I'm wanting to, I have, and yes, I have done this. I have done show notes now in my bed with the back propped up, using a laptop tray, so I can actually work in my room, in my bed, laying down like a lazy SOB, because I know I work all the time, but there are times I do find ways to relax even while I'm working, because I do work all the time. So if you're interested at all, I do encourage you to check them out. They have a really good deal going on right now. And actually that's part of the reason why I took advantage of getting it when I did, because of the deal that they offered. So I do encourage you to check that out. There are several different options. Even if you don't want the adjustable bed and you just want to try out the mattress, you can do that. They do have a 365-night trial and forever warranty on the mattress. So again, if you scan that little QR code in the top corner of the screen, you can take an additional $100 off at checkout. So I do encourage you to at least check that out. All right, so let's get back into the actual notes. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those days where I thought I was underprepared and I have, in fact, again, overprepared. I could be wrong, but it's starting to feel like one of those days. So again, back to what happened yesterday here in Oklahoma. Almost half of the Republicans who showed up yesterday voted for Gettner Drummond, which is terrifying when you think about it. Dude, look, I get it. Neither one of the Republican choices this year were that great. They all had things that you're like, I really feel like I'm going to have to hold my nose and vote for this guy. But Drummond, in my opinion, was still the worst of the two. And that in itself is, as far as Gettner Drummond getting almost half the votes, that is particularly interesting because Drummond is not exactly spent his 10 years as Attorney General behaving like somebody terrified of picking fights. He has taken on illegal marijuana operations, which I'm okay with because, I am a legal MMA card carrier. And I don't, the whole reason that we wanted this stuff in the first place, the way that we wanted it, was to make sure that the people who actually needed it for medicinal purposes, hi, how you doing, could actually get to it. I still think there's some other things that do need to be worked out a little bit. But yeah, so he's not afraid to take on the illegal marijuana operations. He's fought over open records compliance. He's had some very public disagreements with Governor Kevin Stitt. So have I, so I can't say much. And for those of you who don't remember, he actually came on and did a show with me when I was filling in on KOKC. So it wasn't like I'm not a fan. But again, if you can't, and this is something that I know, I'm all over the place today but it's because I haven't done a show since Friday. This is something else that absolutely drives me insane. If you cannot call balls and strikes, especially against your own side, then what the hell's the point? Look, Donald Trump is not perfect. Kevin Stitt is not perfect. I would still, even with all the BS the Republican Party is pulling right now, still vote for them over the Democrats, because while my side might be lazy and still not quite know how to fight, they're at least not ceding all their ground to commies. And like it or not, socialism is the gateway drug to communism. That has been proven out time and time again through history. So the DSA getting their footholds and now starting to get some areas that I would consider beachheads within the Democratic Party is absolutely terrifying, because they're going to spend the next probably 2-3 election cycles purging out the people that are more conservative, or at least more of a standard liberal from the Democratic Party. Not the liberal that the Democrats have turned the word into, but actual critically thinking liberals who are like, well, we may disagree on this, we may disagree on that, but socialism is still a terrible idea. And that's why, even if it had been Drummond, he would probably have gotten my vote in November. I'm kind of glad it's not. And I know a lot of folks are upset with Mazie over the smelter plant thing. I'm actually working on putting together a bit of a deep dive on that. So there will probably be, I don't think it'll be this show, because that's not usually the one I do the long format shows on. But now that we know who's going to be the governor, at least potentially the governor, and that he's actually won the primary, sometime in the next couple of weeks on America Off the Rails, I'm going to take a deep, deep, deep look at what's going on with that aluminum plant, so we can find out together. And at least that way we'll know. So, but again, after some very public disagreements with Governor Kevin Stitt, and also throughout this race, one of the arguments against Drummond was essentially that he wasn't Republican enough. Mazie made that argument himself during the primary. President Trump made his feelings about Drummond pretty clear. Well, that's primarily because it's come to light that Gettner Drummond actually donated to Joe Biden's campaign, allegedly, which is terrifying enough when you think about it. So after all of that, 49-point-something% of Republican runoff voters still said, yeah, we kind of want that guy. That doesn't sound like ideological unanimity to me. It sounds like a Republican Party in Oklahoma that is dominant electorally, but still having a pretty serious internal argument about what kind of Republican is an actual Republican and who should be running the state. And frankly, I think that distinction matters more than the horse race itself, because we've been talking for weeks about restless primary voters. We've talked about Republican voters who generally support Trump, but don't necessarily line up behind every Trump-endorsed candidate. We've talked about voters who want conservative government, but disagree pretty sharply about what that should look like. Once you get past the bumper sticker slogans. Yesterday was another example. The Oklahoma Republican Party isn't divided 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats. It's divided over which version of Republican governance it wants. And that distinction is going to matter going forward. Mike Mazie now moves into the general election against Democratic House Minority Leader Cindy Munson. Oklahoma remains one of the reddest states in the country, so Mazie will begin that race with an obvious structural advantage. But there's an interesting question sitting underneath that advantage. What happens to nearly half of yesterday's Republican electorate that wanted Gettner Drummond instead? Most will likely come home, because that's normally what happens. But do all of them? Will some of them stay home? Does Munson make any serious attempt to reach the Drummond voters who were attracted to his fights with the Stitt administration? Does Mazie spend the next couple of months trying to consolidate Republicans, or does he immediately pivot towards November? Those are questions we don't have answers to yet. But here's what we do know. That was not a sweeping ideological verdict. It was permission to advance to the next round. And there's another reason I don't want to overread the governor's race. Because when we move away from the candidates and look at what Oklahoma voters did on the state questions, suddenly we find some much clearer verdicts. One of them passed. One of them got absolutely demolished. And those results may actually tell us more about what Oklahoma voters are thinking than the governor's runoff did. So we're going to get into what Oklahomans actually said yesterday. All right, so the governor's runoff was basically a coin toss. We've been talking about that since the opening. Now let's look at the places where Oklahoma voters gave us a much cleaner answer, because yesterday's state questions tell a very different story. Also, can I say that the idea that we've put state questions on a runoff election seems a little shady to me? I can understand them being in the primary elections. I can definitely understand them being in the general elections, but sticking 2 state questions in a runoff election, I don't really dig that. I'm just saying. I don't really dig that. So one of them passed and the other got buried without any last rites even being given. And I think the contrast between them is actually more interesting than either result by itself. So let's start with state question 846. That one passed roughly 55 to 45%. And a majority of Oklahoma voters said yes. Now, 55 to 45 is a clear win, but it's not a landslide. Almost half of the people voting on the question said no. And the opposition argument was essentially, we already have voter ID. Why constitutionalize something that's already law? And what happens if lawmakers later start tinkering with what counts as acceptable identification? Those aren't ridiculous questions. But voters heard the argument and still decided they wanted voter ID protected at the constitutional level. So there's one result: clear conservative preference. Not overwhelming preference, but clear preference. Now compare that to state question 844, because this one didn't lose. It got taken out behind the woodshed and spanked. Roughly 3 out of 4 Oklahoma voters said no, and that's about 74%, who actively and openly opposed it by their vote. That was a mandate, and that is what a mandate looks like. 74% said nah. And this question was a lot less intuitive than voter ID, so let me try to strip the government language off of it, because I know once I start talking like they do, everybody's eyes start glazing over. Oklahoma has a property tax exemption for certain qualifying manufacturers. Those businesses can receive a 5-year exemption from ad valorem taxes, but schools and local governments depend on property tax revenue. So when the state gives a qualifying manufacturer that exemption, the state, meaning you and me, reimburses those local entities for at least some of the revenue they otherwise would have collected. State question 844 would have given the legislature more authority over the way those reimbursement amounts are calculated. Supporters said the current system can get very expensive, especially when you start talking about very large industrial projects, manufacturing facilities, data centers, and other developments where the property tax numbers can become enormous. Their argument was the legislature needs more flexibility. We need a way to control the cost. We need to make sure an incentive program doesn't become an open-ended obligation for state taxpayers. That is not an irrational argument. But opponents looked at it and said, hold the phone a moment. You're the ones giving companies the tax breaks. Why should the local school district or county potentially get shorted because the state suddenly decides the reimbursement formula is too expensive? In other words, if Oklahoma wants to offer a company an economic development incentive, fine, but don't promise the incentive in Oklahoma City and then send the bill to the school district. And apparently Oklahoma voters understood that argument pretty well, because 74% said, nope, not happening. That's not a partisan split. That's not one side barely dragging something across the finish line. That is Oklahoma voters looking at a proposed change and saying, nope, leave it the way it is. And I like the contrast between these 2 state questions, because it's important. And I think it is important, because sometimes people assume that Oklahoma voters see anything labeled conservative, pro-business, or Republican and automatically hit that yes button. Yesterday says otherwise. Oklahoma voters were perfectly willing to amend the constitutional laws within Oklahoma to protect voter ID. But when they were asked to change the rules involving reimbursement of property tax exemptions, they rejected it overwhelmingly. And can I just insert one of my usual lines right here? Taxation is theft. Look, I get property taxes for businesses. I really do. I can even understand property taxes while you are actively making payments to your mortgage company or your bank or whoever holds the note. But once it's paid for, it should be paid for. Because if not, you're leasing the land from the government that your home sits on. That's not ownership. This is why I say all the time on this show, one of the biggest mistakes they ever made was changing the original wording in the Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is a volatile term. It's a very mercurial thing to put into a document like that because communists have a very different definition of happiness than we do. Canadians have a very different definition of happiness than Americans do. Foreigners who have now poured into this country and been allowed to pour into this country for the last 20, 30 years while everybody was talking really tough about how we need secure borders and we need this and we need that, have a very different definition of what happiness means than you and I do. So when they start having access to those same things that we do believe are endowed rights by our Creator, and you've made one of them such a mercurial thing, that is insanity to me. The founders understood the reason that the ability to own property mattered. It made you the lord of your own manor, so to speak. You got to remember, these people came from kingdoms and serfdom. That's what they were trying to get away from. And I understand why they made the decision that they made, much like the 3/5 clause that everybody holds. Well, that's such a racist thing. No, it made sure that slavery didn't get to live forever in America, and it made sure that the people that owned slaves didn't have a disproportionate amount of voting blocks in the people's house, which is House of Representatives. Anyway. So, we're going to probably have to go ahead and take a break. So let's get that out of the way now. We'll be right back.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
All right. Whoops. Hang on. Haha, used to that being the second slider. Now it's the third. My bad. All right. Welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on this because everybody else has been talking about it. But I do want to talk about the recent passing first of Dolly Parton. And then today, we find out Tim Curry is gone. So I have a message for 2026. You can suck all the dicks. 2026, because I hate you. Look, Dolly Parton was so here's the thing. We lost, I think it wasn't it Hulk Hogan? We lost in, I think it was 25, I think. No, it was 24. I think it was 24. It was either 24 or the beginning of 25. That one stung. He was one of the, and look, I was never really a big wrestling fan when I was younger. I kind of got into it in my 20s a little bit because my second wife liked it a lot when we were younger. So I kind of got into it. But I used to watch it when I was at my cousin's house because they absolutely loved it. Hogan and Roddy Piper were probably some of my two favorite people in the wrestling world when I was growing up. So watching Hogan, basically, us losing Hogan within, I believe it was a few weeks after he endorsed President Trump. And of course, the left had a field day about that one. But then yesterday, seeing, well, a couple of things that I didn't expect to see. So there were actually some very well-crafted Democratic statements regarding the passage of Dolly Parton. And then there was the usual TDS syndrome folks about the passage of Dolly Parton. Look, I never got a chance to meet Dolly Parton, but I know people who know Dolly Parton. And by all accounts, she was an absolutely amazing individual. She did a lot of charity work. I mean, Gracie got to take advantage of her book charity that she did up until a few months ago when she turned 6. Here's one thing, because this is something that I didn't know. Well, first, when we first tried to sign her up, it said she wasn't eligible. So I don't know if that was because there wasn't anybody in our area that was handling getting the book shipped out, or if it was because they still felt like she was too young when I tried to apply, because I tried to get in super early. But we did eventually get her signed up. I think she was 4. So she wound up getting about 2 years worth of books. We were thinking she was only going to get 1 because it's through their 6th birthday. So they do get them for all of their 5th year. And that, as far as I know, is still going to continue. I believe all of that's built, got a trust built around it. So they're going to find a way to keep that going for as long as they can. But so that was absolutely amazing to me. She's just, I don't know. They played so many of her interview segments. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was, and now I didn't see this live, but I've heard people talk about it. There was a point where she did the Johnny Carson show, and he's sitting right there in front of everybody with them on camera. And Dolly, I will give you my entire annual salary for 1 year if you just show me those things. And she laughed it off. I don't know. From all accounts, she was just an absolutely amazing woman. She made such a difference in a lot of people's lives. And again, everybody's talked it to death. I started trying to do a show prep earlier today, and at least on the couple of conservative leaning channels that I turned on, or the ones that or at least pretend to be centrist or say they are, they were still talking about it a lot. And then while I'm putting show notes together today, I found out we lose Tim Curry, which again, 2026, you can suck all the dicks. I'm going to put that on a bumper sticker, I think. I think that's going to happen. But yeah, so yeah, anyway. Tim Curry, I've actually been more of a fan of some of the voiceover work and stuff that he's done, although I absolutely love the movie Clue. I don't want to say that is an underrated movie because everybody who's seen it has absolutely loved it, and I happen to be one of those people. But I will say it's kind of an underappreciated movie because it had a lot of awesome people in it. And then, of course, he's best known for Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I gotta say isn't really my cup of tea. Never has been. But yeah, so we lost 2 within 24 hours, and they were big. Interestingly enough, it looks like they were both hovering around 80 when we lost them. And yes, I said hovering around on purpose for those of you who weren't sure. Anyway, all right. So let's get back into the notes. And I know for the most part, this has been a very Oklahoma-centric show so far, but there's a reason, because we'll get into more about why I talked about some of this so much later. So again, as complicated as this may seem, because you've got the very narrow margin between Mazie and Drummond, you've got the split on the state questions, but maybe the message isn't as complicated as everybody wants to make it. Maybe Oklahoma voters are conservative, but they're also not stupid. They're willing to say yes to a policy they understand and support, and they're willing to say no when they think the legislature is asking for too much discretion, otherwise known as more power than they deserve. Now, put the 3 biggest numbers from yesterday next to each other. Mike Mazie defeats Kettner Drummond about 50-50. State question 846, that was 55-45. State question 844, 26 in favor, 74% against. Which one of those looks like Oklahoma speaking with one voice? It isn't the governor's race. It's the state question that got absolutely annihilated. And this is why I keep pushing back against the lazy habit of trying to turn every election into one giant ideological message. Sometimes voters are saying different things in the same election. Yesterday, Oklahoma Republicans said we're almost evenly divided over who should lead us. Oklahoma voters said, yes, we want voter ID protected in our Constitution. And Oklahoma voters also said, no, we do not want to give the legislature more flexibility over this reimbursement system. 3 different questions, 3 different answers. And that tells us something very useful. Oklahoma is still deeply conservative. All 77 counties trump 3 times. But conservative voters are not interchangeable parts. They can support Trump and disagree with one of his preferred candidates. They can support voter ID and still tell a Republican legislature no. They can support economic development and still ask who's actually paying for the incentive. That is a much healthier way to read an election than pretending every result is a tribal loyalty test. And if lawmakers in Oklahoma City are paying attention this morning, or this afternoon, shall we say now, maybe there is a broader lesson in that. Voters will give you authority, but they still expect you to explain what you're actually going to do with it. Which is a pretty good place for us to go next, because Oklahoma State Auditor has just identified nearly $25 million, yes, I said million, in federal spending that the state may not be able to adequately defend. And some of the details are extraordinary. We're talking about childcare money, facilities being paid for more children than they were licensed to serve, enrollment paperwork for children who apparently had not even been born yet, millions spent designing a mental health facility that was never built. So after spending the first part of the hour talking about what Oklahoma voters told their government yesterday, let's spend the next part talking about what Oklahoma government has been doing with the money. Show me the money. All right, so Oklahoma voters spent yesterday telling state government what they wanted. Today seems like a pretty good day to ask what state government has been doing with the money. What have you done for me lately, Eddie? Because State Auditor Cindy Bird's office has identified nearly $25 million in questioned federal costs across several Oklahoma agencies. And before we go any further, I want to be precise about that phrase. Questioned costs does not automatically mean somebody stole $25 million. It does not automatically mean fraud either. It means auditors found spending that may have violated federal rules, lacked sufficient documentation, or otherwise could not be cleanly justified. And depending on what federal reviewers ultimately decided, some of that money could potentially have to be repaid. And frankly, some of the details make that distinction feel considerably less comforting. The largest chunk comes from the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, roughly $14.8 million in questioned/questionable cost. Most of that involves childcare funding. And this is where the auditor starts finding things that should make almost anybody stop and ask questions. Auditors found weaknesses in the way childcare subsidies were being verified. They found problems with check-in procedures. They found overnight childcare facilities that weren't necessarily being inspected while they were actually operating overnight. And in one example, a facility was reportedly being paid for nearly twice as many children as it was licensed to serve. Let us say that again. They were being paid for nearly twice as many children as it was licensed to serve. Now, when this kind of story broke in Minnesota, everybody was having a cow. Now, we can make jokes about this all day long, but here we sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Hang on. Okay. So now maybe there is an explanation for that. That's what adults and that's what adults in the room, and that's what audits and responses from those adults are for. But that is not a tiny clerical mistake. That is the kind of number that should trigger an immediate, excuse me, what exactly is going on around here? Then auditors found duplicate enrollment forms, and they found enrollment forms connected to children who, according to the audit reporting, hadn't even been born yet. Now, look, I've heard of getting your kid on the daycare wait list early. Apparently, Oklahoma has moved on to prenatal enrollment. And before somebody sends me an angry email, yes, I am joking, but the underlying issue that we're talking about isn't funny. But it's either laugh or cry. Because every dollar paid improperly through one of these systems is money that isn't going where it was intended to go. And the people those programs are supposed to serve are generally families who actually need help paying for childcare. Now, I'm going to stop right here. Let me mark my place so I don't get confused again. I'm going to stop right here because you got to remember, one of the things the left is pushing for right now is universal childcare. If it's already being, if what little bit of state assistance there is for childcare is already being abused in a red state like Oklahoma, how much worse do you think it's going to get when we start getting things like universal childcare, or we start getting Medicaid for all, Medicare for all? It's going to be untenable. Because look, free to you does not necessarily mean free to me. Free to me doesn't necessarily mean free to you. Just because you're not having to pay for it doesn't mean somebody won't have to pay for it. And I've been saying this for a long time. As soon as we turned over the first rock and realized there was more fraud than we were ever going to be able to uncover in 4 years, as far as I'm concerned, every bit of taxation should be frozen and just stopped until they claw back from and prosecute those that have been bilking you and me for trillions of dollars for God knows how long. You want to know, this is the thing that I don't think anybody's willing to talk about yet. And it's astounding to me. It's astounding to me. Do you realize probably one of the reasons we have, what are we at, $40 trillion in debt now? You want to know probably where about half of that came from? Fraud. How long has this been going on? And then you've got folks like Rand Paul, who, look, most of the time I'm a huge fan of. Had folks like Thomas Massey, who up until recently I was a pretty big fan of. But they stand up and they do their Festivus for the rest of us complaining. And here's the funny stuff that I can show you about how we spent $55,000 putting shrimp on treadmills. We did this, we did that. And it looks good. And it makes the fiscal hawks go, and somebody's paying attention. But it's also sleight of hand because he hasn't been talking about the bigger issues. The fact that USAID has been funneling money back into our elections, allegedly. The fact that every time we send money to another country to help them, a good percentage of it gets funneled back into elections. And guess what? It's only been being funneled back on one side. Why do you think the Democratic Party is officially broke right now? We shut down their perpetual money machines. Allegedly, perpetual money machines. But they still spend like drunken sailors. And I'm not giving the Republicans a pass on that drunken sailor spending bit either, because they do it when they're in power too. The difference is the Democrats do it whether they're in power or not. They have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars fighting everything Donald Trump has been trying to do for the last 18 months, in every courtroom possible just to stop his agenda. And you know why? Here's the point that I want to talk about right now. While we're talking about this waste, fraud, and abuse, even happening in places like Oklahoma. Can you imagine, with the way the country looks right now as far as the economy, with the fact that we've gotten inflation, actual inflation that nobody wants to talk about under Biden was probably about 37%, because they remove all these things to make the numbers lower so there isn't a panic and a run on the banks, because there's now much more zeros in one money than there is paper money in circulation because of the magic money printers printing computers that the federal government has. Let me turn and actually look at you for a second. They have been lying to all of us for years. Rand Paul knew about the worst parts of the fraud. He chose to give you the funny bits. Tom Massey knew about all the fraud. He chose to campaign on it and get you to fundraise him off of it instead of doing something about it. None of these people are on our side. They're on their own. And they have been for a very long time. And this proves it. The one person that I see actually fighting to make things better is President Trump. And he's fighting both sides to do it. Now, I need you to pay attention to what I'm about to say, because with the Democrats fighting him tooth and nail in the courts and trying to stop everything that he's been trying to do, with the Senate being unwilling to allow recess appointments so that he can get his cabinet positions, or not his cabinet positions, but the judges' positions and all the other things the executive branch is responsible for filled in. Now, look at throughout history. There have been hundreds of recess appointments across both parties. You know, the lowest number of recess appointments have been Trump term 1 and Trump term 2, because he's been fighting both sides. But everything that he's done, getting inflation back down to close to manageable numbers compared to where we were, getting some prices down, even taking heat the other day for the fact that he's going to allow tariffs to be suspended on imported beef for now, primarily for things like ground beef, to make sure that the people that are most impacted by these high beef prices still have access to beef. You can say what you want about that, but for everybody that I've seen throwing a fit about it, they don't seem to understand how supply side economics work. Also, at the same time, I live in an area where there are quite a few cattle farms. Everyone that I know is about 90 days from market because of the way the seasons work. We have had the lowest per head herd size in America since the 80s, primarily because of some of the things the Biden administration had done, because they were trying to push us towards, and I'm going to say this part out loud, in my opinion, they were allegedly trying to push us towards Bill Gates and his bug meat, because they thought they were going to be able to do it. And if she had won, if Kamala Hamasnik had won, they probably would have. But look, I know there's a lot of folks that are ticked off, and look, I don't do cattle ranching full time, but I know people who do, and they understand why he's doing what he's doing. I know there are a lot of people on social media that claim to be cattle ranchers that are screaming and yelling about how much this is going to hurt them, etc. It's a 90-day thing, guys. And it's about ground beef. The cheapest beef available is ground beef. It's usually some of the worst cuts. They've got fat from other cuts that are mixed in with it to make it easier to cook and more tender. And it's all the scraps. They're not talking about importing metric tons of steak, metric tons of filet mignon. They're talking about ground beef. And it's only 90 days. the little bit of price relief this is going to bring is not going to be enough to hurt your average farmer, in my opinion. So I don't really understand why we're throwing a fit about it, because everybody's been screaming about affordability. You've been hearing it all over even places like Fox News for the last 6 months. We thought things were going to be better by now. Why is it that we think that 50 years worth of damage can be undone in 18 months? Can somebody explain that to me? Just from a rational perspective. And I get it. Donald Trump brought some of this flack on himself because day one, I'm going to bring egg prices down. Day one, I'm going to do this. Day one, I'm going to do that. Because it sounded good on the campaign trail. But he forgot almost nobody in the media, even the folks that pretend to be on his side, don't really like him. So he was giving them fodder. And his own words have been being used to turn the American public against him. And sadly, in some ways, it's starting to work. Which is why, and I said this when Spam Burger won Virginia, and we're going to take the top of the hour break for a second. When we come back, I got a quick story on her. Then we'll get back into the rest of the show. But we got to take a break here in a second. But I want to finish this thought first. I told everybody if the left would have just kept their powder dry and started doing the crazy stuff after the primaries or after the general election in November, they probably would have retaken the Senate and the House because of the bad taste everybody has in their mouth right now. But the fact that so many of the DSA are cropping up and so many of the crazies seem to be in charge now, I don't think that's going to happen the way they thought it was. I could be wrong. November's still a ways off, and anything could happen between then and now. But we got to take a break. Hour 1 is in the books. Hour 2 coming your way. For those of you that are listening, I do want to take the time to say thank you for doing so. If you haven't done so yet, please make sure you like, share, subscribe, follow, whatever your options are. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more. And the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight. Entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST. The future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the number one way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout. Heartland Radio, raw and real. Tune in, speak up, and feel what we feel. He's breaking down the noise, cutting through the lies, shining light where the shadow hides. With guests in the mix and callers on cue.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, right here live in KLR Radio Studios, Oklahoma. Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday, Hump Day, Chat Lives Matter Day, whatever you want to call it. And hour 1 is in the books. Hour 2 starting now. Let's get going.
Talk for the people, talk that's real. The Rick Robinson Show where we say what we feel.
Again, want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out with me today. Got a couple of people hanging out that are willing to chat, which is awesome. I know XChat's been being weird. We're working on a behind-the-scenes way to get everybody back to our website again. Once we get all of that squared away and figured out, we will let you know. You will still have the option to listen and watch in all the usual other places, but we've decided with everything being changed all the time and all the algorithms being weird and different, we're going to start pushing people back towards the website again. Reasons. But anyway, welcome back into the program. So let's get back into where we left off. So if you're just joining us, we've been mostly talking about Oklahoma today with some national stuff sprinkled in. I had thought things were going to be a little more national centric than they wound up being today, but a lot of the bigger stories that we're talking about that have national consequences are still landing right here in my home state of Oklahoma. So when we left, we were talking about some questionable payments that have been uncovered through some investigation through Sydney Bird's office, who also was on one of the shows when I was on KOKC. So anyway. So we're not just talking about an accounting spreadsheet, though, for those of you that are just joining us. This is a program with a purpose. And if the controls are weak enough that questionable enrollments, because remember, we're talking about things like kids that are on the enrollment list that haven't even been born yet, which is weird. So, and not to mention a lot of questionable check-ins or questionable capacity numbers. And if those things can make their way through the system, then somebody needs to explain where are the safeguards, because there's supposed to be obvious safeguards for all this stuff. They have to be able to explain where those things failed. There was also concern over the electronic attendance system. Auditors found that some attendance information could apparently be changed within a roughly 10-day window. And according to the auditor's findings, there were suspicious patterns involving some parents who worked for or were related to the daycare owners. Again, suspicious is not the same thing as being guilty of something. Questionable or questioned is not the same thing as proven fraud. But this is exactly why internal controls exist. You don't build a government program about the assumption that everybody involved will always do the right thing. Remember that old adage, hope for the best, prepare for the worst? We really got to start living by that again. Just saying. Just saying. You build systems that make it difficult to do the wrong thing without somebody noticing. And then there's the overnight inspection issue. According to the audit reporting, roughly 89% of overnight facilities were not inspected between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., which raises a very important yet obvious question. If it's an overnight childcare facility and inspectors almost never show up overnight, what exactly are we inspecting? That's like reviewing a nightclub exclusively at 10 in the morning. Maybe the chairs are clean. I'm more interested in what happens when the place is actually doing business. And all of this connects to another DHS program that auditors have already been raising concerns about here in Oklahoma, and that's the state's childcare desert program. Across 2 years, the program has reportedly accumulated more than $24 million in questioned/questionable cost. Byrd is now calling for a special investigation audit of DHS Child Care Services and says her team cannot launch that broader investigation without a new authorized request from DHS leadership, the governor, the attorney general, or another official empowered to ask for it. So here's a question I'd like answered. If the state auditor believes a special investigative audit is warranted, who is going to request one? And if nobody does, why not? Because at some point, this stops being an accounting question and becomes an accountability question. The audit also raises concerns involving SNAP. Oklahoma's payment error rate is sitting at roughly 11%. And beginning in 2027, states with sufficiently high error rates can face financial consequences under federal rules. The threshold we're talking about is 6%. As of right now, Oklahoma is nearly double that amount. Now, that doesn't mean 11% of SNAP payments are fraudulent. Payment errors can happen for all kinds of administrative reasons. But if your error rate is almost twice the level that can trigger penalties, you probably don't get to shrug and call those close enough for government work. And they do that a lot. And DHS isn't the only agency on this list. The Office of Management and Enterprise Services, the bane of my existence when I worked for OU, yes, I said it out loud, has roughly $3.8 million in question cost, much of it tied to the COVID-era Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Remember those programs? Washington sprayed money everywhere. They made it rain like they were in a damn strip club with a wallet full of money during COVID and essentially told states, get it out the door fast. Well, years later, auditors are still walking behind that money with a flashlight trying to figure out where some of it went and whether the rules were actually followed. Rules? We don't need no stinking rules. It's a COVID emergency. Just throw money at it. It'll be fine. But potentially, if federal officials decide those expenses don't qualify, taxpayers get to experience the joy of paying for the same mistake not once, but twice. Once when the money went out, and again if Washington calls it back. But that's the part of this audit that may create the biggest political headache. And this headache belongs to the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, roughly $6.2 million in question costs. A majority portion involves the proposed Donahue Behavioral Health Campus. The department spent more than $6 million on design and planning, but the facility itself was never built. According to the auditor's findings, there wasn't adequate documentation showing that the department had sufficiently evaluated whether the project was financially feasible over the long term or adequately accounted for escalating construction costs. So Oklahoma taxpayers spent millions planning a facility that never materialized. That, ladies and gentlemen, isn't something that's happening in a vacuum. This is the same agency that revealed a roughly $30 million budget shortfall last year and needed an emergency appropriation from lawmakers just to finish the fiscal year and be able to make payroll. So when an audit turns around and says, oh, by the way, here are another $6 billion in question costs tied to a facility you didn't get, people are entitled to get a little miffed. And I don't think the right response is to immediately start screaming fraud, because we don't have to. The facts themselves are frustrating enough without adding the layer of fraud. We can simply ask, why were millions committed before the state had adequately documented whether the project failed or whether the project made any fiscal sense at all? What controls failed the DHS? Why could subsidy records apparently be manipulated the way auditors describe? Why were overnight facilities rarely inspected overnight? Why are we still carrying questionable COVID-era spending years later? And most importantly, who is responsible for fixing any of this? Because here's the problem with the phrase question costs. Government loves language like that because it's wonderfully bloodless and a little obtuse. Nobody lost money. They're simply questioned expenditures. Nobody messed anything up. Nobody screwed up at all. These were control deficiencies. Nobody failed to verify something. There were documentation concerns. And maybe every individual item ultimately has an innocent explanation. Fine. Then explain it. Produce the documentation. Correct the procedures. Recover whatever money shouldn't have been paid and tell Oklahoma taxpayers what happened. Because you don't need to accuse anybody of stealing $25 million to ask why the state can't cleanly demonstrate that $25 million was in fact properly spent. And remember where we started the show. Yesterday, Oklahoma voters told lawmakers, yes, we want this. No, we don't want that. And absolutely not. Don't give yourselves more discretion over this other thing. Maybe they're onto something, because government authority is supposed to come with accountability. And if the people writing the checks can't explain the checks, maybe asking a few more questions before handing over more authority isn't such a terrible idea. Because while we're talking about accountability inside institutions, there's now an extraordinary investigation underway involving the agency responsible for protecting the President of the United States. 3 Secret Service employees have reportedly been placed on administrative leave as investigators look into potential misconduct with outside reporting. Me trying to talk, take 2. With outside reporting pointing toward possible leaks of sensitive information. Sorry, I was starting to get a scratch in my throat. I tried to save the sips for breaks, but anyway. And depending on exactly what investigators find, this may be considerably more serious than another Beltway story about somebody talking to a reporter. Just saying. Just saying. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break here, just another music break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the number one way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
All right, welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. So before we went to break, we were teasing a story about the Secret Service. Then I realized I didn't have my notes about the Secret Service, so we fixed that while we were on break. Did I mention this is a Wednesday that feels remarkably like a Monday? Because it kind of does. Anyway, so 3 employees of the United States Secret Service have been placed on administrative leave while the agency investigates potential misconduct. All 3 are non-law enforcement personnel, which should only make us feel a little bit better. And one of them is Secret Service Chief of Communications, Anthony Guglielmi. CBS News reports their security clearances have been suspended and their access to work devices have been revoked. These steps are standard during an internal investigation and do not prove wrongdoing. The Secret Service itself has confirmed only that its Office of Professional Responsibility, otherwise known as OPR, is investigating potential misconduct. Now, outside reporting goes a little further. Real Clear Politics reports, citing sources familiar with the matter, that investigators are looking at how classified or otherwise sensitive information may have reached the press. That report also says the FBI and CIA are also involved. The Secret Service has not publicly confirmed those details. So, that's weird. Sorry, hang on. So Real Clear Politics is also citing sources familiar with the matter that investigators are looking at how classified or otherwise sensitive information may have reached the press. That report also says the FBI and CIA are involved. Sorry, I had to back up a second. I was hearing a weird noise from my new climate control device in my studio, and I was like, what is that? But I think I know what it was. Because you can't see it, but there's a picture of Rush Limbaugh sitting on top of my climate control device, and I think it occasionally makes it rattle in weird ways. Anyway. Sorry. The Secret Service also has not publicly confirmed any of these details at this time. So the line here is simple. Confirmed, 3 employees on leave, internal misconduct investigation currently underway. Reported, possible leak of sensitive or classified information, possible FBI and CIA involvement. What we do not know yet is exactly what information may have been leaked. And that matters because there have already been highly sensitive security stories involving the president and the vice president. One involves the extraordinary security operation surrounding President Trump's abrupt departure from Turkey amid an Iranian threat. Separately, a Secret Service agent assigned to Vice President J.D. Vance's protective detail was recently placed on leave over an alleged unauthorized disclosure involving sensitive travel or security information. So at some point, it becomes fair to ask, does the Secret Service have a leak problem? Not, are these 3 people guilty? Because we don't know that yet. We also shouldn't say things like, did they leak information about the Turkey operation? Because we don't know that yet either. But Does an agency responsible for some of the most sensitive operational information in the federal government have a problem controlling who talks about that information? That question is legitimate. The Secret Service has one job where failure is not an acceptable metric: protect the president. And to do that, it has to control information. Where is the president going? When? Which route? Which aircraft? Which motorcade? Who knows? And who doesn't need to know? Because operational security only works when the guy trying to kill the president, or the woman trying to kill the president, because this is the 21st century, doesn't get the itinerary. Iran makes the stakes even more serious. Reuters reported yesterday that the Secret Service is aware of an Iranian state television video discussing a possible threat against Barron Trump. That does not connect that threat to the current investigation, but it does show the current security environment is not a theoretical scenario, which means that if sensitive protective information is leaving the Secret Service without authorization, the consequences are not simply political embarrassment. They could potentially be measured in lives. And that's why this investigation matters. We don't have a verdict yet. We have an investigation. But if sensitive presidential security information is actually leaking out of the agency responsible for keeping him alive, somebody needs to find that leak and plug it really damn fast. I'm just saying. And you can be mad at me about it all you want if that's what you want to do. I don't really care. Because, look, again, I call balls and strikes all the time, and it's what I do. And it's the truth. Because here's the thing, folks. I'm going to say this again. There are things that our media does not have a right to know until the government decides that they have a right to know them. And the fact that so many people inside of this administration are doing what a lot of folks did during his first term and leaking information, that is astounding to me. Give me just a moment here. Sorry about all the dead air. I'm fighting with my tools, and like I said, I'm still learning a new layout because the new machine has Windows 11, and not everything's the same as it was on Windows 10. So, okay, so let's back up a second because this Guglielmi guy, he's not just some guy working 3 floors down who nobody outside the building has ever heard of. He is, in fact, the currently suspended, but still before that, public voice of the Secret Service. He was the guy answering questions after the assassination attempt in Butler. He has been the person communicating publicly about some of the most serious failures and controversies the agency has experienced in years, if not decades. So if the chief communications official himself is among 3 communications office employees suddenly placed on leave while the OPR folks take a look at everything and see how much misconduct is there, that is actually news, even if he's ultimately completely cleared. But the communication office sits at an interesting intersection inside an agency like this. Its job is literally to take information from inside a highly secretive security organization and determine what can safely be communicated outside of said agency. That requires a tremendous amount of trust. You need people who understand the difference between the public deserves to know this, and if we tell the public this, we may also be telling somebody who wants to kill the president. That is a very narrow, but still very important line. And this gets us back to a much larger problem that we've been talking about here on this program and others like it for years. Washington has developed a culture where leaking has almost become another form of political communication. Don't like a policy? Leak it. Trying to shape a story? Leak that too. Want to kneecap somebody inside your own administration? Leak, leak, leak. Want a reporter to tell the public what your boss won't? Leak that too. Sometimes leaks expose legitimate wrongdoing. History is full of examples where whistleblowers and sources revealed things the government absolutely did not want the public to know. And in most cases, we say things like, thank God they did. Well, we also have gotten dangerously lazy about pretending all leaks are morally equivalent, because they aren't. Leaking evidence that a government agency is breaking the law is one thing. Leaking the security arrangements of the president or vice president because you don't like them is something else entirely. One can expose abuse of power. The other can potentially give an assassin a roadmap. And if we're incapable of distinguishing between those two things because we like the political outcome of a leak, then we've lost the plot, ladies and gentlemen. So here's what I'm watching as this investigation develops. First, what exactly is the alleged misconduct? The Secret Service hasn't told us that yet. Second, is this actually a classified information leak investigation as sources are reporting? Third, are the FBI and the CIA actually involved? And that would tell us this is considerably bigger than an internal HR dispute. Fourth, is there any connection to the Turkey operation or other Iranian threat intelligence? Right now, that connection is speculation only. Fifth, is this part of a larger pattern? Because once could be one rogue employee, twice could be coincidence, but I don't believe in those either. But if investigators begin identifying multiple unauthorized disclosures involving the travel and security of top American officials, the institution itself has a problem. And that's where this story intersects with everything we've talked about in the first hour. Accountability doesn't mean only asking where the money went. Sometimes accountability means asking who had access to information, what did they do with the information they had access to, and whether the safeguards designed to protect that information actually worked or not. We don't have a verdict yet. We only have an investigation. And until we get one, that's exactly how we're going to treat it. But given the threat surrounding the president right now, this is one investigation I would not dismiss as another Washington personnel fight. Because if sensitive presidential security information is actually leaking out of the agency responsible for keeping him alive, somebody needs to find that hole and plug it, and they need to do so very, very fast. All right, so we're going to move into the next national level story that we have right now. And this one is one that I think should have probably happened a little bit sooner than it has, but I'm glad it finally seems to be happening. So we're going to go from an agency trying to figure out who may have leaked sensitive information. Let's move to another part of the executive branch where the administration have decided the existing system needs to be tightened up. The Trump administration has temporarily paused immigrant visa appointments worldwide, while the State Department retrains consular officials on how to apply tougher screening standards. And I want to start with one distinction because it's important. We're talking about immigrant visas. These are people seeking to come to the United States to live here permanently. We're not talking about student visas, which I think still need to be looked at either or as well. We're not talking about tourist visas. We're not talking about somebody coming over for a temporary work assignment. Those are non-immigrant visas, and according to the reporting we've got right now, those are not part of this worldwide pause. So this is not America has stopped issuing visas, although for now I honestly kind of think we should. It is the State Department has temporarily stopped immigrant visa appointments around the world while consular officials receive new training. That's a pretty significant difference. Unless you listen to the left, and then it's, oh my God, this president hates all foreigners. Sure. Now, why is this administration doing this? The State Department says the purpose is to improve consistency in how officers screen applicants who could eventually become dependent upon public benefits. In immigration law, that's the old public charge question. In plain English, if you're asking permission to permanently immigrate to the United States, does the government have reason to believe you will be able to support yourself, or are you likely to become primarily dependent upon taxpayers? The administration has been tightening that standard for months. Earlier this month, the State Department announced a pilot program that allows consular officers, in some cases, to require immigrant visa applicants who are denied on public charge grounds to obtain a financial bond as another way of demonstrating that they are unlikely to become a public charge. And now, officers around the world are being retrained on how to make those determinations. According to the Wall Street Journal, the updated screening can include things like financial resources, education, English proficiency, and overall health. So this is not really an illegal immigration story. That's what makes it interesting. For years, the immigration debate has been dominated by the southern border. people crossing illegally, asylum claims, ICE, deportations, sanctuary cities, all of that. This, however, is different. This is the Trump administration saying we're going to scrutinize the legal immigration system too. About damn time. And politically, that's an important distinction because the common Republican line for years has been we don't oppose immigration, we oppose illegal immigration. Fine. But if you're going to say that, then eventually you have to answer a second question. What kind of legal immigration system do you actually want? How many people? Under what standards? What should qualify somebody to come permanently? What should ability to support yourself matter? Should family sponsorship be enough? Should employment sponsorship be enough? How much discretion should consular offices have? Those are much more complicated questions than did somebody cross the border illegally. And this administration is clearly moving toward a legal immigration system that is more selective. Now, supporters are going to look at that and say, of course, why would a country knowingly admit somebody for permanent residence if officials have a strong reason to believe that person is going to become dependent upon public assistance? That is not an anti-immigration argument. That is a basic condition of immigration. If you're moving permanently to another country, that country is allowed to establish qualifications. Critics, though, see something much larger happening. They argue that a public charge standard can very quickly become a wealth test. If financial resources matter, if education matters, if English proficiency matters, if overall health matters, then the practical effort may be that poorer people from poorer countries have a much harder time immigrating legally, even when they otherwise qualify. And there's already a legal fight over exactly how far the administration can go. Just 4 days ago, a federal judge struck down a separate Trump administration policy that had suspended immigrant visa processing for nationals of 75 countries. The administration said that policy was also designed around concerns about applicants who might become public charges. The judge ruled that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had exceeded his statutory authority by imposing the suspension broadly by nationality rather than leaving individual admissibility decisions to consular officers. And now, days after that court loss, we have a worldwide pause while the State Department retrains the officers who actually make those individual decisions. I'm not going to pretend I can tell you this during this show exactly what that legal fight is or where it ends. But the consequence is certainly worth noticing. One policy gets knocked down because the judge says you can't simply suspend people from dozens of countries as a group. And the administration responds by going back to the people. Congress actually gave discretion to consular officers in tightening how they evaluate applicants one at a time. That could turn out to be a much more durable approach, or somebody may sue over this one too. Odds are 90-10. It's immigration policy. Of course somebody's going to sue. That's practically part of the implementation process now. But here's where I think larger political arguments are going. For decades, Washington has spent a lot of time debating illegal immigration without ever resolving the harder question of what legal immigration is actually supposed to accomplish. Is the immigration system primarily about reuniting families? Is it about filling labor shortages? Is it about attracting highly skilled workers? Is it humanitarian? Is it economic? Is it demographic? Is it all of those things? And if it is all of those things, which one wins when there's a conflict between them? Because come legally is not actually a complete immigration policy. It describes the door you're supposed to use. It doesn't tell us who should be allowed through that particular door. And I think we're starting to see the Trump administration answer that question. Their answer appears to be fewer people, more scrutiny, more emphasis on financial self-sufficiency, and more discretion for the government to decide whether somebody seeking permanent residence is likely to benefit the United States. You can agree with that, you can disagree with it, but that's a much broader project than simply sealing the southern border. And there's another piece here that is going to matter immediately. People already had appointments. Families already had interviews scheduled. Workers already had processes underway. Those appointments are now being rescheduled. And as of today's show, there does not appear to be a clear public timeline for when normal immigrant visa scheduling resumes. So even if the pause really is temporary, and the administration says it is, there's going to be disruption. That's unavoidable. The question is whether the administration can make the case that the disruption buys something worthwhile. Better screening, more consistency, fewer people admitted who later become dependent on taxpayer support. And then eventually, we're going to need some receipts, because that's the theme today, isn't it? Government says, trust us. This policy is necessary. Okay, sure, fine. But show us what it accomplished. How many applications were screened differently? What changed? Did the new standards actually improve the system? Or did we simply create another backlog? That's the measurement that ought to matter after the political argument burns itself out. Speaking of policies that sound pretty straightforward in Washington until you ask who actually absorbs the consequences, President Trump has another plan aimed at lowering prices. And we teased this a little bit in the beginning of the program. This one involves beef, and Oklahoma cattle producers have some thoughts. We're going to get into that after we take the last break of the show. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We were born to stand and never bow again. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. Forever reign. Now the walls are shaking from the battle cry. Truth is rising to the sky. Every soul that ever felt the weight of chains feels the fire of freedom in their veins. No more chains, no more lies. Hear the thunder as we rise. Freedom's call won't be denied. Now the fire burns worldwide. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We were born to stand and never bow again. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. From red dirt roads to the Capitol.
All right. Welcome into the final few minutes of the Chat Lives Matter Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. I want to thank the nearly 100 of you that have been hanging out across the streams today. It'll take a while for all the numbers to come through, but considering I've been more hit than missed lately, or more missed than hit lately, hitting nearly 100. Not terrible, since I didn't promote very well. I'm going to start working on that too, now that we're getting some of this other stuff lined out. However, before we get back into the prepared notes of the show, I do have something else that I want to talk about because this is kind of a big deal. This is from Jeff Charles over at Town Hall. Apparently, the State Department is taking massive action against groups aiding Antifa and Hamas. The State Department announced on Wednesday that it is designating a foreign group with ties to Antifa, Hamas, and others as a terrorist organization. The agency made this announcement in a memo obtained by Fox News earlier today. A State Department memo reveals that International Technology Collective, now under a U.S. global terrorism designation, provided services to overseas terrorist groups and violent far-left agitators causing chaos in American cities, according to a copy obtained by Fox News Digital. Far-left terrorism poses a profound threat to the United States and the broader West. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement to Fox News Digital today the United States sanctioned Autistici Inventati, a major far-left tech collective whose services are used by the most active and violent Antifa cells in the United States and across the world. This is the AI Collective in English, and they've been labeled by the State Department. This is an Italy-based group that builds highly sophisticated digital infrastructure used by violent left-wing organizations in the United States and Europe, along with Islamic terrorists, according to the State Department. The collective services include encrypted chats and email, web hosting, secure video conferencing, and streaming, and anonymity shields, according to the memo. These tools are specifically designed to support the operations of far-left terrorist networks, built to enable them to organize, recruit, communicate, disseminate propaganda, share target information and tactics, and carry out violent attacks, all while remaining anonymous, untraceable, and beyond the reach of the law, says the State Department. AI Collective has officially been deemed a specially designated global terrorist. The designation bars Americans and U.S. financial institutions from doing business with the group and freezes any assets it has under U.S. jurisdiction. Violators can face civil as well as criminal penalties. This is from World News. Just now, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced U.S. sanctions designating the Italy-based Autistici Inventati as a specially designated global terrorist for providing encrypted hosting, email, and communication tools to violent far-left networks. Far-left radicals in European nations like France, Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands use the organization's tools to carry out attacks on infrastructure and to distribute instructions on manufacturing improvised incendiary devices, otherwise known as things that go boom, all according to the State Department. Anarchists who claimed responsibility for sabotaging infrastructure, supporting the Transalp pipeline, a major crude oil artery into Central Europe, also used AI Collective tools, according to the memo. Hang on. So yeah, they sabotaged those things. That was a weird sentence. Sorry, my fault. The State Department says the same was true of the far left Volksgruppe, which has targeted German infrastructure since 2011 and claimed responsibility for a January attack that knocked out power in roughly 45,000 Berlin homes. In 2025, President Donald Trump declared Antifa to be a terrorist organization. The AI Collective was founded in 2001 and provides free encrypted email, web hosting, no blogs, blogging, video conferencing, and other digital tools to assist left-wing extremist groups in their operations. It maintains a no logs policy and vets users to make sure they are true believers in leftist ideology. The Treasury Department said the organization provides those tools to Antifa in the United States and other extremist groups. The group claims to host about 16,000 mailboxes, 1,500 websites, and 5,500 mailing lists, along with 10,000 blogs. So, yeah, fun times. So I thought that was important enough that we should bring that up, because this is some of the stuff that I've been talking about for a while. We now know what a lot of these groups are. We know who they are. We know what they do. Why we haven't been treating them like terrorists up until now is still a little bit astounding to me. But what can I say about it other than at least we finally did something? But so, and this is all this is basically what we're talking about today is accountability. And here in the last few seconds or last few minutes of the show, we're going to talk about this whole beef story, which I've talked about throughout the show already, but we're going to try to go into a little bit more detail. And if it takes a couple minutes to finish it up, then that's fine. So before we broke into this, group that's finally been labeled a terrorist organization, we were talking about immigration policy and the differences between what sounds simple in Washington and what becomes complicated once you actually start applying it. Well, the same thing is happening with beef. President Trump has announced a temporary plan to allow up to 300,000 metric tons of imported ground beef into the United States under reduced tariffs over the next 90 days. The goal is pretty obvious. Beef prices are high. Consumers are irritated about those high beef prices. The administration wants prices down. Trump says the imported beef could be sold at roughly 25% below current market prices. Now, I will say this. I'm not really a fan of the whole price controls thing, so him setting the target at around 25% below, I don't really know if I'm comfortable with that part. And again, that's just me trying to call balls and strikes. So if you're standing in the grocery store looking at hamburger that costs almost $7 a pound, I understand why that sounds pretty appealing. But here's where Oklahoma enters the conversation. Oklahoma cattle producers are looking at the same policy and saying, hold up. Because one person's cheaper hamburger may be somebody else's smaller paycheck. And in Oklahoma, that matters. This is cattle country. Oklahoma producers are already dealing with a national herd that is near historic lows after years of drought and contraction. And ranchers have been trying to rebuild it, and that takes time. You don't manufacture another cow next Tuesday because Washington decided beef is expensive. Biology is stubborn that way, and this is where the timing becomes especially painful. Oklahoma ranchers are preparing to sell spring calves. For a lot of those producers, that's the big payday of the year. State Senator Casey Murdoch, who raises cattle himself, told Oklahoma Voice that many ranchers effectively get one paycheck a year when they sell that calf crop. So imagine spending months paying for feed, fuel, fertilizer, veterinary costs, equipment, land, interest, everything it takes to get the calf to market, and right as you're preparing to sell, the federal government announces it's going to inject lower-priced foreign beef into the marketplace. You can understand why the guy raising the cow might not be applauding quite as loudly as the guy standing in the meat aisle. Oklahoma Farm Bureau has publicly criticized the plan. The Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association has criticized it as well. National cattle groups have criticized it, and some Republicans from other major cattle states are pushing back as well. This isn't Democrats attacking Trump because it's Tuesday, or in this case, Wednesday. This is part of Trump's own political coalition telling him, we think you're solving the consumer's problem by handing the bill to the rancher. And that's a debate conservatives ought to be willing to have. Because if we're going to talk about America first, if we're going to talk about protecting American industry, if we're going to tell American producers we're going to stop undercutting them with cheap foreign competition, then Oklahoma cattlemen are allowed to ask, are we included as America first? That's not disloyalty. That's not anti-Trump. That is a producer looking at a federal policy and asking what it does to his business. And maybe the policy still makes sense. But you don't answer that question by telling the rancher to shut up because the president is on your team. You answer it with numbers. And the numbers are where this gets interesting. Economists have questioned whether 300,000 metric tons of additional imported beef is actually enough to move grocery store prices very much. Some also point out that imported lean beef is frequently blended with domestic beef for processing rather than simply appearing in the grocery case at a cheaper replacement pound for pound. So there's a legitimate question here. How much does the consumer actually save? Because if the answer is not much, while cattle futures drop and producers take a hit, then we may have created a policy that produces a very visible political headline without producing much actual relief at the checkout line. And to Trump's credit, he appears to be hearing some of this criticism. Earlier today, during an appearance with Glenn Beck, Trump said he's willing to look at regulations affecting beef pricing. That could be important because there's another part of this story that doesn't get nearly enough attention. 4 large companies, Cargill, Tyson, JBS USA, and National Beef control roughly 85% of the U.S. meat processing market. So maybe before deciding that the guy raising cattle in Oklahoma is the problem, we ought to ask what happens between the ranch and the grocery store cooler. How competitive is the processing market? How difficult is it for smaller producers to produce their own beef? Do federal regulations unintentionally reinforce consolidation? Are consumers paying high prices because cattlemen are making too much money, or because there are bottlenecks further down the chain? The Justice Department is already investigating whether meatpacking companies have engaged in price manipulation. So there may be a much bigger question sitting underneath the argument over imports. And Governor Kevin Stitt has now created an Oklahoma Beef Industry Advisory Council to look at ways to strengthen the state's cattle industry in the middle of all of this. That tells you Oklahoma officials recognize this isn't just another Washington policy debate. This hits one of the state's core industries, and it hits them directly. So I think the fair way to frame Trump's beef policy is this. The goal is understandable. Consumers need relief. Beef is expensive, but policy isn't judged only by its intention. It's judged by what actually happens next. If imported beef knocks down prices materially for American families without doing long-term damage to domestic production, then the administration will have something to point to. If it barely moves grocery prices while hammering cattle production and cattle producers, right as they're trying to rebuild the herd, then Oklahoma ranchers are going to have every right to say, "We told you." And again, I keep coming back to the title of today's show. They asked for trust. We asked for the receipt. Show me the receipts. How much did hamburger actually come down? How much did cattle prices move? Did herd rebuilding slow? Who actually benefited? Because if Washington tells us Oklahoma ranchers if Washington tells an Oklahoma rancher that he needs to absorb a financial hit so somebody in New York can save 20 cents on hamburger, I'd at least like to know the 20 cents actually showed up. All right, we got a couple minutes left, but I got to hit on this one. And that brings us to a number Washington can no longer pretend isn't there. And that number is $40 trillion. The gross national debt of the United States has now crossed that mark, $40 trillion. And I know what happens whenever we talk about the national debt. People start looking like Homer Simpson in the nuclear reactor chair. And I know that. That's okay. Because the number is absurdly large. And it's so absurdly large that it stops feeling real. $1 million, we can grok that concept. $1 billion, maybe a little bit. But once you get into the realm of $1 trillion, at that point, we're basically discussing monopoly money with commas. $40 trillion is not a number that the human brain was designed to casually process. But here's one way to make it more concrete. The United States crossed $39 trillion in March. We crossed $40 trillion in August. That's another $1 trillion in roughly 5 months. And the problem isn't simply that the number's sitting on the scoreboard. It's what we now pay just to carry it. Annual federal interest expenses are around $1 trillion. Not roads, not troops, not Social Security checks, not border security, not a bridge, not a single one, not a school. No, not even one MRI machine. Interest, the price of yesterday's promises. And once you get into that cycle, debt starts feeding more debt. You borrow money, then you owe interest on what you've borrowed. Then you borrow more, partly because you're paying more interest. Then interest costs rise yet again. And eventually, the fastest growing thing in Washington isn't a program. It isn't the DSA, although that's close. It's a bill from all the programs we already bought. Now, this is where both parties suddenly become very creative. Republicans will tell you Democrats spend too much, which is accurate. Democrats will tell you Republicans' tax cuts reduce revenue, while Republicans continue spending anyway, which is technically also correct to a point. However, we have actually seen studies that showed again and again, lower tax rates typically often lead to more revenue because lower tax rates lead to more innovations. But I will say the Republicans do, in fact, still spend too much. And anybody would desperately prefer that you only remember the half of the equation that makes the other team look bad. The truth is uglier. Neither party has demonstrated that it is actually willing to govern at the scale required to fix this. not to campaign on it, not to hold a press conference about it, not to put out an email saying, hey, I need your help to do this. Please send me $5. Yeah, none of that. But to actually fix it, because fixing it means somebody doesn't get something they were promised or somebody pays more. Probably a little bit of both. And that's where fiscal conservatives tend to become considerably less popular than fiscal conservative rhetoric. Everybody wants spending cuts until you name the spending that you're going to be cutting. Everybody wants smaller government until you close the thing in their district. Everybody wants the deficit reduced until you tell them which benefit changes. Everybody hates taxes, and everybody loves the program their taxes supposedly pay for. That's how you get to 40 trillion. Not because Washington accidentally misplaced the checkbook. Because for decades, we've demanded a government that gives us more than we're willing to pay for. And politicians in both parties figured out that borrowing the difference was easier than telling voters no. That's the receipt. $40 trillion. And now the bond market is starting to pay closer attention. Long-term treasury yields have been climbing. 30-year borrowing rate has pushed above 5% recently, while Treasury officials have been trying to manage pressure in the bond market. That matters because the government doesn't get some magical special interest rate disconnected from reality. When investors demand higher returns to lend Washington money, financing debt gets more expensive, which means the interest problem gets worse. And current projections still show federal debt continuing to climb sharply over the next decade. So maybe this is the perfect place to end today's show. We started with Oklahoma voters. We asked whether a 50-50 election result really constitutes a mandate, because it doesn't. We looked at voters telling lawmakers yes on one state question and overwhelmingly no on another. We looked at state auditors asking Oklahoma agencies to explain millions of dollars in question costs. We looked at the Secret Service investigating whether sensitive information may have escaped an institution whose entire mission mandate depends on controlling sensitive information. We looked at Washington tightening legal immigration and saying, trust us, we need more scrutiny. We looked at Washington trying to make beef cheaper and Oklahoma ranchers saying, fine, show us who pays for it. And now we end at $40 trillion, the biggest receipt of all. Government asks for trust constantly. Sometimes it deserves it. Sometimes it doesn't. But trust is not supposed to mean stop asking questions. Trust is what comes after the questions have been answered. So when somebody in government says, trust us, I think the response ought to be pretty simple. Fine, but show me the receipts. I'm Rick Robinson. This has been the Chat Lives Matter Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. I will be back tonight. Some programming TBD. It's supposed to be an inquiry night. We will find out if those guys are available as soon as I go run an errand real quick. And also tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, we will be doing Toxic Masculinity. I had, before I realized G was going to be taking a bit of a hiatus, decided to move that one to the end of the month. I think we may just count this as a makeup for not doing it on the second Wednesday of the month and just move back there. Because I guess for the near future, most of the time in the 8 o'clock hour, you're going to get one of my shows, whether it be Kingdom and Country or America Off the Rails. Because G's having to step away from the mic for a while, which made me a little sad the other day. So I'm glad that he wanted to make the announcement during Toxic, but it was just one of those weeks where everything that could have gone wrong kind of did. So we decided to shelve it, and I'm kind of glad that he didn't make the announcement on Toxic, because I wouldn't have been able to talk for most of the show. For those of you who don't know, I've been doing this now for going on 20 years. He's one of, and I'm rounding a bit, but he's one of the original OGs. I think he's about 14 years in at this point. So he's one of the last original crew left. Well, original crew version 2, because the other two guys that started all this with me years ago, they've already moved on and they do other things. But anyway, that's going to do it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Rick Robinson. Want to thank you for taking time to hang out with us today. And you'll have to forgive me. When we changed the formats, I lost some of my board settings. So I do not have Say Goodnight Gracie loaded onto the board yet. We'll get that fixed by Friday. Bye, everybody.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show, where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout.